In the grandest mansion in Belgravia, an elderly woman silently struggles against forgetfulness and loneliness. But her apparent fragility hides a keen insight that begins to unravel dark secrets surrounding her. While everyone celebrates the perfect engagement, she perceives the poison behind the smiles. And a whispered promise can unleash the truth that will change everything that night.
The Alcott mansion stood imposingly atop Belgravia, an affluent district of London, like a monument to wealth and power. Its impeccable gardens, designed by renowned landscapers, were maintained with the precision of a Swiss watch. The Italian marble floor gleamed under the golden rays that streamed through the wide windows, reflecting light onto the crystal chandeliers imported from Belgium. It was the perfect portrait of success. Bernard Alcott, at 47, commanded one of the largest business groups in the country. A man of impeccable appearance, with graying hair at his temples that only accentuated his air of authority, he had transformed his father's inheritance into an empire. From his corporate penthouse in the city's financial district, he controlled businesses ranging from agribusiness to emerging technologies, always a step ahead of the market. His presence at social events was coveted, his opinion respected in any circle of power. On that autumn morning, the businessman was signing documents in his office when he heard a noise coming from his mother's room. He dropped his gold pen onto the rosewood desk and hurried down the corridor. Mrs. Cecilia, a 76-year-old lady, was sitting on the edge of the bed, looking confusedly out the window. "Mother, is everything all right?" Bernard asked, approaching cautiously. The lady turned her face to him, her blue eyes clouded by confusion. For a moment she didn't seem to recognize her own son. "Augustus, is that you, Augustus?" she asked, calling him by her late husband's name. Bernard felt his heart clench. This had been happening more frequently in recent months. The doctor had explained it was part of the progression of Alzheimer's, the disease that slowly stole his mother's memories, blurring her present with fragments of the past. "No, Mother. It's me, Bernard, your son," he replied patiently, gently holding his mother's wrinkled hand. Mrs. Cecilia blinked a few times, as if trying to adjust the focus of a camera. Gradually, a smile of recognition lit up her face. "Bernard, my son. How silly of me. Of course it's you," she squeezed his hand. "Where is Augustus?" Before he needed to answer, soft knocks on the door announced the arrival of Julia Olsen, the housekeeper who had worked in the mansion for almost 5 years. A 38-year-old woman with dark skin, deep brown eyes, and hands calloused from hard work since childhood, Julia carried a tray with Mrs. Cecilia's breakfast. "Excuse me, Mr. Alcott, I've brought Mrs. Cecilia's breakfast, with those mini cheese buns she loves so much," Julia said, with the simplicity and human warmth that were her trademark. Upon seeing Julia, Mrs. Cecilia's eyes sparkled in a special way. "Juju, come here, my dear," she called with genuine joy, extending her arms. Bernard watched, intrigued, how his mother immediately recognized the housekeeper, while minutes before she had not recognized her own son. There was something about Julia's presence that calmed Mrs. Cecilia, momentarily bringing her back from the confusion that inhabited her mind. Julia approached, placing the tray on the bedside table and sitting beside the elderly woman. With delicate gestures, she helped her settle more comfortably against the pillows. "Did you sleep well, Mrs. Cecilia?" she asked as she gently arranged her employer's white hair. "I slept like an angel, dear. I dreamed of my childhood garden in Yorkshire. There was a jabuticaba tree so laden with fruit that its branches almost touched the ground," the lady replied, with a momentary clarity that was surprising. Bernard observed the scene with a mixture of gratitude and something else he couldn't name. He appreciated Julia's care for his mother, but part of him felt an indefinable discomfort seeing the special bond between them, something he himself couldn't establish, despite all his efforts. "Son, have you met Priscilla? She's such a polite young lady," Mrs. Cecilia commented, referring to her deceased sister as if she had just arrived for a visit. "Yes." "Mother," Bernard replied, exchanging an understanding look with Julia, "I need to get back to work now. Julia will stay with you." "Don't worry, Mr. Alcott," Julia said. "After breakfast, we'll take a little walk in the garden. Mrs. Cecilia likes to see the flowers." Bernard nodded and left the room, feeling the weight of his responsibilities. In the corridor, he met Felicity Meadows, his fiancée of 8 months, tall, elegant, With perfectly styled blonde hair and impeccably manicured nails, Felicity was the marketing director for a large luxury retail chain. At 35, she had beauty, ambition, and an incredible ability to make a good impression. "Darling, how is she today?" Felicity asked, adjusting the collar of her burgundy blazer. "Another confused day," Bernard replied. "She called me Augustus again." Felicity smiled with studied sympathy, placing her hand on her fiancé's arm. "It's normal, dear. The doctor already explained that this will happen more and more. You can't blame yourself." He nodded, grateful for the support. What he didn't notice was Felicity's glance towards Mrs. Cecilia's room, a quick glance but loaded with impatience. A glance that spoke volumes about her true feelings. "I have a meeting with Chinese investors today," Bernard said, consulting his Swiss wristwatch. "I won't be back until tonight." "Don't worry," Felicity replied, adjusting his tie with precise gestures. "I'll take care of everything here. In fact, I just remembered I need to review the engagement party details with the caterer. It's going to be the event of the year. Everyone is talking about it." Bernard smiled, proud of his fiancée's efficiency. With Felicity by his side, he felt that his life was finally fitting into the model of perfection he had always sought. An elegant and intelligent wife who would assist him both in social life and in business. "What would I do without you?" he asked, kissing her lightly on the lips before heading for the stairs. Outside the room, Julia overheard the conversation as she served breakfast to Mrs. Cecilia. Her face showed nothing, but her eyes registered everything. When she turned her attention back to the elderly woman, she smiled gently. "Come on, Mrs. Cecilia, these mini cheese buns are delicious. You need to eat well." In the office, before leaving, Bernard checked some messages on his phone, among them a notification from his bank app, another large transfer to the private clinic account that cared for his mother. The treatment costs were astronomical, but he would never economize when it came to Mrs. Cecilia's well-being. He looked out the window at the meticulously kept gardens and took a deep breath. His life was exactly as he had planned, except for his mother's deteriorating health. Meanwhile, in the room, Mrs. Cecilia held Julia's hand as she ate the mini cheese bun. Suddenly, she stopped and looked at the housekeeper with surprising lucidity. "She doesn't like me," the elderly woman said in a low voice. "Who, Mrs. Cecilia?" Julia asked, surprised by the sudden clarity. "The pretty lady. She smiles, but her eyes don't smile." "I can see," the lady replied before returning to eat, as if the moment of lucidity had never happened. Julia remained silent, thoughtful. Mrs. Cecilia, in her moments of clarity, seemed to see beyond appearances, as if the confusion in her mind had opened up space for a sharper perception of certain details that others did not notice. In the mansion's garage, Bernard got into his latest model Mercedes. The driver was already waiting for him, ready to take him to the financial district. As he started the car, he had no idea that, behind the perfect facade he had built, invisible forces were beginning to stir, threatening to collapse everything he considered solid and secure. The elderly woman shook her head firmly. "No, that young lady, she's not what she seems. When Bernard isn't here, she changes. She talks to me as if I were a stupid child. She hides my things and then says I lost them because of my bad head." Julia swallowed hard, confirming her own suspicions. She had witnessed some strange attitudes from Felicity, but always convinced herself that she was misinterpreting, that it wasn't her place to judge. "Are you sure, Mrs. Cecilia? Maybe you're confusing things." "I'm not confusing anything." The elderly woman's voice rose with surprising firmness. "I may forget what I had for breakfast, but I can recognize falseness." Her eyes. They are cold when she looks at me. Like a snake's eyes. At that moment, knocks on the door interrupted the conversation. Julia quickly put the necklace back in its box and placed it in the dresser. "Come in," said Mrs. Cecilia. Felicity appeared at the door, her perfectly rehearsed smile lighting up her face. "It's time for your medicine, Mrs. Cecilia," she announced, entering with a glass of water and a small pot of pills. Julia, my friend Patricia has just arrived. Could you prepare some coffee for us on the veranda? We'll discuss the final details of the engagement party." Julia hesitated, looking at Mrs. Cecilia, who now seemed smaller and more fragile in the armchair. "You can go, dear," the elderly woman said with a sad smile. "I'm a little tired anyway. I think I'll rest a bit." Reluctantly, Julia left the room, not without casting a last glance at the dresser where the small box was kept. In the corridor, she found Patricia Morrison, elegant in her natural silk dress, talking on her cell phone. "Hello, Julia," Patricia greeted, hanging up the phone. Her tone was polite, but distant, the kind of calculated cordiality that wealthy people usually used with servants. "Felicity said you make wonderful coffee." "I'll prepare it right away, Mrs. Morrison," Julia replied, heading to the kitchen. While waiting for the water to boil, she couldn't help but think about Mrs. Cecilia's words. Could it be that Felicity really mistreated her when no one was looking? The idea that someone could be cruel to a sick and vulnerable elderly woman made her blood boil. But what could she do? She was just the housekeeper, her word against that of the future lady of the house. On the veranda, Felicity and Patricia chatted animatedly about the engagement party, planned to be the social event of the year. Julia served the coffee and some petit fours on a silver tray and discreetly withdrew. "The old lady is worse every day," Felicity commented, as soon as she was sure they were alone. Today she was talking about family jewels and other nonsense. "Sometimes I think she hides things on purpose just to annoy me." "You need to be patient," Patricia advised, stirring her coffee with a silver spoon. "After the wedding, everything will be easier. Bernard will trust you more to make decisions about her care." Felicity smiled, imagining the day she would finally be Mrs. Alcott, with unrestricted access to her husband's fortune and decision-making power over all household matters, including Mrs. Cecilia's fate. In the room, the elderly woman watched the two women talking on the veranda through the window. Her eyes, sometimes confused, now shone with painful clarity. She knew she was losing pieces of herself every day, that her mind was slowly fading. But ironically, this very condition seemed to have sharpened her perception of certain aspects of human nature. She saw in Felicity something that her son, blinded by love and perfect appearance, could not see. "Augustus," she whispered to her husband's portrait on the small table beside the bed. "What should we do to protect our boy?" In the kitchen, Julia prepared lunch, thoughtful. Mrs. Cecilia's words echoed in her mind. Part of her wanted to believe that they were just confusions of a mind affected by illness. But her instinct told her there was truth in those accusations. She decided that, from that moment on, she would pay more attention. She would observe Felicity carefully, and, if necessary, she would protect Mrs. Cecilia, even if it meant risking her job and her stability. What Julia didn't know was that this decision would forever change the course of her life and the fate of the Alcott family. The following days passed with apparent normalcy at the Alcott mansion. Bernard was immersed in his business, Felicity busy with the engagement party preparations, and Mrs. Cecilia alternating between moments of confusion and rare flashes of lucidity. Julia, in turn, had become a silent observer, attentive to every detail, every interaction between her employer's fiancé and the elderly woman. On a rainy Thursday, while Bernard was attending a conference in Edinburgh, Julia was tidying clothes in Mrs. Cecilia's closet when she heard raised voices coming from the room. She cautiously approached the half-open door. "But I don't want to change my clothes now," Mrs. Cecilia was saying, her voice trembling. "I'm waiting for Augustus to come home from work." "For goodness sake," Felicity's voice was sharp as a razor. "Augustus has been dead for over 10 years. Dead, do you understand? You can't keep up with this nonsense. I have important guests arriving in an hour, and I don't want you to appear disheveled and confused. Embarrassing all of us." Julia saw through the gap in the door how Felicity grabbed Mrs. Cecilia's arm, forcing her to stand up from the armchair. The lady let out a moan of pain. "You're hurting me," the elderly woman protested, trying to free herself. "And you're giving me a headache," Felicity retorted. "Now let's change that ridiculous outfit. Come on, get up." That's when Julia could no longer contain herself. She pushed the door open and entered the room. "Mrs. Meadows, can I help with anything?" she asked, keeping her voice controlled, though her heart pounded. Felicity immediately released Mrs. Cecilia's arm, her face transforming into a mask of concern. "Oh, Julia, how good of you to arrive. I was trying to help Mrs. Cecilia get ready for tea with my friends, but she's a little confused today." Julia noticed the red marks on the elderly woman's pale, thin arm, the tremor in her lips, the eyes brimming with suppressed tears. Something inside her, a knot of indignation, tightened. Don't worry, Mrs. Meadows, I can help her with this. You can continue with your preparations for the guests. Felicity hesitated for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly as she perceived the housekeeper's tone. But then she smiled, adjusting the pearl necklace around her neck. Of course, thank you. Make sure she wears the navy blue outfit I picked out. And please do something with her hair. It looks like it hasn't been combed in days. As soon as Felicity left the room, Mrs. Cecilia began to cry silently. Julia knelt before her, gently holding her hands. It's all right now. No one will force you to do anything you don't want to, she said in a soft voice. She's mean, Julia. When Bernard isn't here, she changes, the elderly woman whispered. Yesterday, she hid my medicine and said I lost it. Then I found it in the bathroom bin. Julia felt a wave of anger run up her spine. This went beyond simple dislike. It was deliberate cruelty against someone vulnerable. Mrs. Cecilia, why don't you tell your son about this? The elderly woman shook her head sadly. He wouldn't believe it. Felicity is perfect in his eyes. And my head isn't right. He'd think I was making things up. There was a terrible truth in that statement. Who would believe the word of an elderly woman with Alzheimer's against that of the impeccable fiancé? Julia took a deep breath, making a silent decision. She helped Mrs. Cecilia get ready, choosing a floral dress the lady liked, instead of the formal outfit Felicity had set aside. She gently combed her hair, fastening it with a graceful mother-of-pearl clip. You look beautiful, she said, leading her to the mirror. Now how about we go down to the winter garden? It's warm there, and you can rest a bit before the visitors arrive. In the winter garden, a glass-enclosed area filled with exotic plants, Julia settled Mrs. Cecilia in a comfortable wicker armchair. The rain fell softly against the glass roof, creating a relaxing music. I'll get you some tea, Julia said. I'll be back in a minute. In the kitchen, she found Charles, the gardener who had worked at the mansion longer than she had. A man of few words but observant eyes, he had noticed the growing tension in the house. How's the mistress today? He asked as he cut some roses for the living room arrangements. Not very well, Julia replied, putting water on to boil. Charles, have you noticed how Mrs. Meadows treats Mrs. Cecilia when Mr. Alcott isn't here? The gardener looked up cautiously. I've noticed some things, yes, but in this house, Julia, it's best to keep your eyes open and your mouth shut. I have 2 children in college to support. Julia nodded, understanding the dilemma. She also had her responsibilities. She supported her sick mother in Brixton and helped her younger brother with technical school expenses. She couldn't afford to lose that job, but she also couldn't ignore the cruelty she witnessed. I just don't think it's fair, she murmured, preparing the tea. Mrs. Cecilia has always been good to all of us. Charles sighed, arranging the roses in a crystal vase. Life is rarely fair. Julia, especially for people like us. Returning to the winter garden, Julia found Mrs. Cecilia looking at the rain, lost in thought. Beside her, to her surprise, was Patricia, Felicity's friend, who seemed to have arrived early for tea. Ah, the efficient housekeeper, Patricia commented with a polished smile. Felicity tells me you're a treasure in this house. Thank you, Mrs. Morrison, Julia replied, placing the tray with the tea on the side table. I do my best. Julia takes care of me as if she were my daughter, Mrs. Cecilia intervened with unexpected clarity. I don't know what I would do without her. Patricia raised a perfectly arched eyebrow. How touching. But Felicity told me you were helping Mrs. Cecilia get ready. That's not the outfit she had picked out, is it? Julia felt her stomach drop. Of course Patricia would notice that. Mrs. Cecilia preferred this dress, she replied firmly. I thought it would be best to respect her choice. Oh, of course, Patricia said with a condescending tone. But you know how important it is for Felicity that everything is perfect today, don't you? These small deviations can upset the future lady of the house. The veiled threat did not go unnoticed. Julia served the tea in silence, while Patricia said goodbye, saying she would look for Felicity. As soon as they were alone, Mrs. Cecilia held Julia's hand. You shouldn't have defended me. They'll make you pay for it. Julia's heart tightened with the genuine concern in the elderly woman's eyes. Don't worry about me, Mrs. Cecilia. I can take care of myself. Later that afternoon, while tea was being served in the main living room, Julia was in the kitchen preparing canapes when Felicity appeared, closing the door behind her. We need to talk, she said, her voice low and controlled, but her eyes flashing with anger. Who do you think you are to countermand my orders? Julia continued cutting the cucumbers precisely, maintaining her composure. I just thought Mrs. Cecilia would be more comfortable in clothes of her choice. I didn't mean to disrespect you. Listen closely, Felicity approached, her posture intimidating. You are just the housekeeper here. Your job is to obey, not to offer opinions. The next time you interfere with how I deal with my future mother-in-law, you'll be on the street before you even realize what happened. Julia finally stopped what she was doing and faced Felicity. With all due respect, Mrs. Meadows, I cannot ignore it when I see someone being mistreated, especially someone as vulnerable as Mrs. Cecilia. A cold smile formed on Felicity's lips. Do you really think anyone will believe the word of a mere housekeeper against mine? Bernard trusts me completely. If I say you're stealing or mistreating his mother, who do you think he'll believe? The venom of those words hit Julia like a slap, but instead of intimidating her, it ignited something within her, a fierce determination to protect Mrs. Cecilia, whatever the cost. Perhaps you are right, she replied calmly. But even so, I cannot pretend not to see what is happening. Felicity narrowed her eyes, studying the housekeeper with new interest. You like her, don't you? The confused old lady. You've formed a bond. She laughed, a joyless sound. How touching. But know one thing, Julia. After the wedding, many things will change in this house, and you may not be part of those changes. With that, Felicity turned to leave, but stopped with her hand on the doorknob. Oh, and bring more of those salmon canapes. My friends loved them. When she left, Julia let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands trembled slightly. The threat had been clear and the risks enormous, but something inside her had irrevocably changed. She could no longer remain silent. In the main living room, as she served canapes to the elegant guests, she observed how Felicity exhibited Mrs. Cecilia as a curiosity, almost like an exotic pet. She has good days and bad days, she explained with false compassion. Today is a reasonably good day, isn't it, darling? She said, addressing the elderly woman as if speaking to a child. Mrs. Cecilia merely smiled vaguely, her gaze meeting Julia's across the room, a look that conveyed everything words could not express. Later that night, after the visitors had left and Felicity had gone out for dinner with friends, Julia found Mrs. Cecilia in her room, looking at old family photographs. She approached silently, not wanting to interrupt that intimate moment. Julia, the elderly woman called, surprising her. Come see these photos. The housekeeper sat beside her on the edge of the bed. Mrs. Cecilia showed a photograph where she appeared young and radiant, next to a tall man with a wide smile. This is Augustus, my husband, the day we bought our first apartment. It was small in Whitechapel, but to us it seemed like a palace. Julia smiled, touched by the memory preserved amidst so many that were lost. You were very beautiful. You still are. Mrs. Cecilia laughed softly. Beauty fades, my dear. What remains is character. She turned the album page, showing another photo, this time with a boy of about 5 years old. Look, little Bernard. So sweet, so sensitive, always wanting to please his father. He looks happy in this photo, Julia commented. He was happy, Mrs. Cecilia sighed, before he became who he thought he needed to be. There was profound wisdom in those words, a perception that transcended the limits imposed by the disease. What do you mean? My Bernard, the elderly woman explained, stroking the photo with trembling fingers, grew up believing he needed to be perfect. That success meant control, appearance, status. When Augustus passed away, he took on not only the businesses, but a distorted idea of what it meant to be a man, to be the head of the family. She looked at Julia with impressive clarity. And now he believes that woman is perfect for him, because she represents everything he thinks he needs to be. Julia was impressed by the depth of that analysis. You should tell him that. Mrs. Cecilia shook her head sadly. He wouldn't listen to me, not now. But one day, she carefully closed the album and handed it to Julia. Keep this for me. I want you to have it. But Mrs. Cecilia, this should stay with your son. And it will. When the time is right, for now I trust you to keep it safe. There was something in the elderly woman's tone that prevented any argument. Julia accepted the album, feeling the weight of the responsibility it represented. Now, Mrs. Cecilia said, suddenly looking tired, I think I need to rest. It was a difficult day. Julia helped her prepare for bed, adjusted the pillows and covered her with a light blanket. As she was about to leave, the elderly woman's voice stopped her. "Julia?" "Yes, Mrs. Cecilia." Thank you for seeing me, really seeing me." With a heavy heart, Julia left the room carrying the family album and a renewed determination. Something had to be done before it was too late. The preparations for the engagement party took over the Alcott mansion in the following weeks. Decoration professionals, caterers and sound engineers transformed every room, every corridor, every corner of the garden. Under Felicity's precise command, the residence took on the air of a fairy tale palace, exactly as she had always dreamed. Bernard, absorbed in an important negotiation with Chinese investors, left all the details in his fiancée's hands, limiting himself to signing checks that seemed endless. The closer the date, the more absent he became, a paradox that did not go unnoticed by Julia. It was a sunny Wednesday when Bernard finally returned from a 3-day trip to London. Julia watched him from the kitchen window as he got out of the car, looking exhausted. Before he could enter the house, Felicity ran to meet him, impeccable in her emerald green dress, hair perfectly styled. "What a performance," Julia murmured to herself, watching Felicity embrace her fiancé effusively, as if they had been separated for months, not days. "Talking to yourself now, Ju?" Charles, the gardener, surprised her. "Just thinking aloud," she replied, moving away from the window. "How are the arrangements for the party?" Charles grimaced. "A nightmare. Mrs. Meadows changed her mind 3 times about the flowers. Now she wants orchids imported from Thailand. Said ours weren't special enough." Julia nodded, understanding. All the household staff were feeling the pressure of the preparations. "How is Mrs. Cecilia?" Charles asked, lowering his voice. "More confused in recent days," Julia replied, beginning to prepare the coffee Bernard always asked for upon returning from a trip. "I don't think all this commotion is helping. In truth, the situation was worse than she admitted. Mrs. Cecilia was becoming increasingly withdrawn, frightened by the constant movement of strangers through the house. The previous night, she had a particularly difficult episode, not recognizing where she was and repeatedly calling for Augustus. Felicity, irritated by the inconvenient interruption, as she called it, had practically ordered Julia to keep her locked in her room during suppliers' visits. "This party is too important to be ruined by her delusions," she had declared, not caring whether the elderly woman heard or not. Now, watching the couple enter the house, Julia took a deep breath, preparing for what was to come. Bernard would certainly want to see his mother, and she feared his reaction upon realizing the deterioration of her condition. "Julia." Felicity's voice sounded over the kitchen intercom. "Bring coffee to the office, please, and those biscuits Bernard likes." "Yes, ma'am," she replied automatically, as she prepared the tray. In the spacious, wood-paneled office, Bernard examined the folders with the party suppliers' contracts, while Felicity excitedly explained every detail. When Julia entered with the coffee, she noticed the tiredness in his eyes. "Excuse me," she said, placing the tray on the table. "Welcome back, Mr. Alcott." He looked up and smiled, a tired but genuine smile. "Thank you, Julia. How is my mother?" Before she could answer, Felicity intervened. "She's having difficult days, dear. The commotion in the house makes her confused. But don't worry, Julia has been taking very good care of her." Julia felt the fiancé's gaze on her, a clear warning not to contradict her. "Yes, I'm doing my best," she replied cautiously. "But I think Mrs. Cecilia would feel better if she could see you, sir. She's been asking for you a lot." Bernard nodded, running a hand through his graying hair at his temples. "I'll see her as soon as we're done here." He turned to Felicity. "Darling, don't you think we're overdoing it a bit? These budgets are astronomical." Felicity waved her hand dismissively. "It's our engagement party, Bernard. We want it to be unforgettable, don't we? Besides, all our friends and associates will be there. It's an opportunity to strengthen important connections." She smiled, leaning in to kiss him lightly on the lips. "Trust me, it will be perfect." Julia withdrew, silently disturbed by the subtle manipulation she witnessed. On the stairs, she found Mrs. Cecilia trying to descend alone, leaning on the handrail with trembling hands. "Mrs. Cecilia?" she exclaimed, running to help her. "You shouldn't be walking alone. You could have fallen." The elderly woman smiled, her blue eyes shining with surprising determination. "I heard my son's voice. I want to see him. Julia hesitated. Felicity had been clear about keeping Mrs. Cecilia away during party planning discussions. But how could she deny a mother the right to see her own son? "Let's go then," she decided, offering her arm for support. "He's in the office." As they reached the office door, they heard Felicity's raised voice. "We can't let her circulate freely during the party, Bernard. You know how she gets. What if she has one of her episodes in front of everyone? It would be embarrassing." "We're talking about my mother, Felicity," Bernard replied, his tone tense. "I can't just hide her as if she were something shameful. I'm not suggesting hiding her. I just think it's more prudent for her to stay in her room, comfortable, away from all the commotion. It would be better for her, too." Mrs. Cecilia stiffened beside Julia, who could feel the tremor increase in her fragile arm. "Let's go back, Mrs. Cecilia," she whispered. "We can see your son later." But it was too late. Bernard had opened the door and found his mother standing there, her pale face reflecting the pain of the words she'd just heard. "Mother," he exclaimed, surprised. "What are you doing here? You should be resting." "I came to see you, my son," she replied, with a dignity that moved Julia. "I missed you." Felicity approached, her perfectly calculated smile not hiding the irritation in her eyes. "Mrs. Cecilia, how good to see you on your feet. But you shouldn't be walking alone." "Julia, I thought you were taking care of her." "I insisted," Mrs. Cecilia intervened before Julia could respond. "I wanted to see my son." Bernard embraced his mother tenderly, leading her into the office. "Come, Mother. Sit here with me. How are you?" As he talked gently with his mother, Julia noticed the furious look Felicity shot her. There would be consequences later, but at that moment, seeing the smile on Mrs. Cecilia's face made any future reprimand worth it. "I wish your mother could participate more actively in the party preparations," Felicity said, her sweet tone completely contradicting the conversation they had just had. But the doctor was so emphatic about avoiding stressful situations. Julia admired Felicity's ability to distort reality. It wasn't the doctor who wanted to keep Mrs. Cecilia away, but Felicity herself. "I can help," the elderly woman said, surprising everyone. "I always liked organizing parties." Bernard smiled, touched by his mother's moment of clarity. "Of course you can, Mother. How about helping choose the flowers? You always had good taste for arrangements." Felicity's face hardened for a fraction of a second before she recovered her smile. "What a wonderful idea. Julia can take her to see the florist's catalogues later. Now, dear, we need to finalize these contracts before the suppliers start arriving." It was a polite but unequivocal dismissal. Julia offered her arm to Mrs. Cecilia. "Come on." "Mrs. Cecilia, we'll show the catalogues to your son later too." In the corridor, out of Bernard's earshot, Felicity caught up with them, grabbing Julia's arm with surprising force. "What do you think you're doing?" "I made it very clear she should stay in her room." "She wanted to see her son," Julia replied, keeping her voice calm, despite her growing anger. "I can't stop her from that." "You can and you must if I order it," Felicity hissed. "Don't forget your place in this house." Mrs. Cecilia, who was observing the scene with frightened eyes, suddenly spoke with impressive clarity. "Stop threatening her. She's just doing her job." Felicity turned to the elderly woman, her face a mask of false concern. "Mrs. Cecilia, you're confused again." "No one is threatening anyone. We're just talking about the best care for you." "I'm not confused," the elderly woman replied, raising her chin with dignity. "I know exactly what's happening." For a moment, the three women stood in the corridor, the air between them thick with tension. Then from the office came Bernard's voice calling for Felicity. The moment passed, but something had changed. A silent challenge had been issued. The following days passed in a whirlwind of activity. The mansion transformed day by day, gaining lights, flowers, special carpets. The guest list exceeded 300 people, the crème de la crème of London society, influential politicians, powerful businessmen. For Julia, each day became more difficult to protect Mrs. Cecilia from the chaos and Felicity's veiled hostility. The fiancé, pressured by the preparations and irritated by her future mother-in-law's interference, became increasingly impatient. On the eve of the party, when the house was practically transformed into a ballroom, Bernard finally had a moment to sit with his mother in the winter garden. Julia, arranging some cushions nearby, couldn't help but overhear the conversation. "Mother, I want you to know how important it is to me that you are present tomorrow," he said, holding the elderly woman's hands in his. "I know big events can be tiring, but I promise we'll make sure you're comfortable." Mrs. Cecilia smiled, her eyes shining with lucidity. "My son, you are a good man. Your father would be proud to see what you've built. Do you think so?" he asked, suddenly looking like a boy seeking approval. "I'm sure. But he would also tell you to trust your heart, not just your head." Bernard frowned, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Cecilia hesitated, as if carefully choosing her words. "Felicity is a very beautiful and intelligent young woman." "Yes, she is." "You like her, don't you?" Again the hesitation. "I like to see you happy, my son." It wasn't exactly an answer, and Julia realized that Bernard also noticed it. But before he could press further, Felicity appeared, radiant in her new dress. Oh, what a beautiful scene. Mother-in-law and son talking. She approached, kissing the top of Mrs. Cecilia's head with false affection. "I was thinking, darling, that perhaps your mother should wear that navy blue outfit tomorrow. It perfectly matches the decor we've chosen." "I don't like navy blue," Mrs. Cecilia said suddenly. "I've always preferred bright colors." Felicity smiled, tense. "But blue is so elegant, Mrs. Cecilia, and in photos, it will look perfect with the color scheme we planned." "Mother can wear whatever color she prefers," Bernard intervened, gently squeezing the elderly woman's hand. "Isn't that right, Felicity?" Felicity's smile wavered for an instant, but she quickly recovered. "Of course, darling. I just wanted everything to be perfect for both of you." When Bernard was called away to solve a problem with the sound company, Felicity turned to Julia, who was still arranging the cushions. "Prepare the navy blue outfit for Mrs. Cecilia tomorrow," she ordered in a low voice. "And make sure she wears it. But Mr. Alcott just said—" "I heard what he said, but he doesn't understand the importance of details. Navy blue is appropriate for the occasion and for her age." Beside them, Mrs. Cecilia observed the exchange with attentive eyes. To both their surprise, she spoke in a firm voice. "I will wear my red dress. It was Augustus's favorite." Felicity took a deep breath, visibly containing her irritation. "Mrs. Cecilia, red is a very striking color for a lady of your age. And besides, this is an engagement party, not a carnival ball." "It's my house," the elderly woman replied, with a dignity that defied her physical fragility. "And my son said I can wear whatever color I want." The air between them became charged with tension. Julia remained motionless, witnessing the silent clash of wills. Finally, Felicity smiled, a cold smile that did not reach her eyes. "We'll see tomorrow." Then, that night, as she helped Mrs. Cecilia prepare for bed, Julia felt a growing apprehension about the party the next day. Something told her it would be a breaking point, the moment when all accumulated tensions would finally come to a head. "Julia," Mrs. Cecilia called, as the housekeeper arranged her pillows. "Do you believe ghosts exist?" The unexpected question caught Julia by surprise. "I don't know, Mrs. Cecilia. Why?" "Because sometimes, when my mind gets confused, I feel like I'm becoming one, present but not entirely here, visible but not seen." She paused, her blue eyes fixed on Julia. "But you see me, don't you?" "I see you," Julia confirmed, holding the wrinkled hand tenderly. "And I always will." "Tomorrow," Mrs. Cecilia said with surprising clarity, "wear the red dress. No matter what she says, promise." "I promise," Julia replied, feeling that she was agreeing to something much bigger than simply choosing an outfit. When she turned off the lights and closed the bedroom door, Julia could not imagine how that promise would change everything in the next 24 hours. The day of the grand party dawned with a perfect blue sky, as if specially ordered for the occasion. From the early hours of the morning, the Alcott mansion buzzed with activity. Decoration teams putting the finishing touches, waiters being instructed, musicians testing equipment. Felicity, in her silk robe, moved through every corner of the property with a critical eye, ensuring everything was absolutely impeccable. Julia woke up earlier than usual, with a strange feeling in her chest, that kind of premonition you can't explain but also can't ignore. Her first task was to prepare Mrs. Cecilia's breakfast, as she did every day. Entering the elderly woman's room, she found her already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, looking out the window at the unusual movement in the gardens. "Good morning." "Mrs. Cecilia," she greeted with a smile. You woke up early today. It's the big day, the elderly woman replied with surprising clarity in her eyes. So many people. It's like Princess Isabel's wedding. Julia smiled at the temporal confusion, already accustomed to the leaps Mrs. Cecilia's mind made between different eras. It's your son's engagement party, she explained gently, placing the tray on the bedside table. Remember? Tonight. Mrs. Cecilia nodded slowly, her eyes regaining focus on the present. Yes, the engagement. Bernard and that young lady. What's her name again? Felicity, Julia replied, serving the chamomile tea the lady preferred in the morning. Ah, yes, Felicity. A momentary silence. She doesn't like me. The frankness of the statement caught Julia off guard. Normally, even in her moments of lucidity, Mrs. Cecilia avoided speaking directly about Felicity. Why do you say that? The elderly woman took a small sip of tea before replying, Because I'm an inconvenience. A reminder of what she might become one day. Her blue eyes met Julia's, and because I'm the only one who sees through her. There was a profound wisdom in those words, a keen perception that defied the limits imposed by the disease. Julia sat beside her on the bed. Have you talked to Mr. Alcott about this? Mrs. Cecilia shook her head with a sad smile. My son only sees what he wants to see. It's always been like that since he was a boy. She paused, her hands trembling slightly as she held the cup. But today something will change. I feel it. The premonitory tone in the elderly woman's words sent a shiver down Julia's spine. What do you mean, Mrs. Cecilia? Before she could answer, knocks on the door interrupted the conversation. Felicity entered without waiting for permission, already perfectly made up despite the early hour. Good morning. How's our star today? Her tone was exaggeratedly cheerful, almost childish. Ready for the big party? The contrast with the way she spoke to Mrs. Cecilia when they were alone was so striking that Julia had difficulty maintaining a neutral expression. I brought something special for you, Felicity continued, handing a flat box to the elderly woman. Open it. Mrs. Cecilia opened the box with hesitant fingers, revealing a navy blue outfit, exactly what Felicity had insisted on the day before. It's beautiful, isn't it? Felicity insisted, her smile not reaching her eyes. It will match the decor perfectly. And it's so elegant for a lady of your age. Julia observed the scene, feeling indignation grow in her chest. The manipulation was blatant. Thank you, Mrs. Cecilia replied politely, closing the box. But I've already chosen what I'm going to wear tonight. Felicity's smile froze for an instant. Oh, really? And what would that be? My red dress. The silk one. Felicity shot a sharp glance at Julia, clearly suspecting her influence. Mrs. Cecilia, we've already talked about this. Red is too striking. This outfit I chose especially for you will be perfect. Won't it, Julia? Caught off guard by being placed in the middle of the confrontation, Julia hesitated. She knew that agreeing would mean betraying Mrs. Cecilia's trust, but openly disagreeing with Felicity could cost her job. I think Mrs. Cecilia should wear what makes her feel good, she replied diplomatically. Felicity's eyes narrowed dangerously. Well, let's leave that for later. I have 1,000 things to sort out. She turned to leave, but at the door, added in a tone that allowed no retort. Julia, come to my room later. I need to talk to you about your duties today. As soon as Felicity left, Mrs. Cecilia took Julia's hand in hers. Don't let her intimidate you, child. This is still my house. There was so much affection and concern in those blue eyes that Julia felt a lump in her throat. This fragile and sick woman was more worried about Julia's well-being than her own comfort. Don't worry about me. Mrs. Cecilia, I can take care of myself. Later, in Felicity's room, Julia found the fiancé organizing jewelry for the party. The luxurious chamber, decorated in shades of cream and gold, exuded opulence in every detail. Close the door, Felicity ordered without looking up. When Julia obeyed, she finally faced her. I want to make something very clear. Today is the most important day of my life, and nothing, absolutely nothing, will spoil it. Understood? Yes, ma'am, Julia replied, maintaining a respectful tone. Mrs. Cecilia will wear the outfit I chose. If she appears in anything else, I will consider it your responsibility and you will suffer the consequences. The threat, not even veiled this time, hung in the air between them. Julia took a deep breath before replying. With all due respect, Mrs. Meadows, I cannot force Mrs. Cecilia to wear something she doesn't want. She is Mr. Alcott's mother, not a child. Felicity rose abruptly, approaching so close that Julia could smell her expensive perfume. Listen closely, little housekeeper. I know very well that you've been filling that old woman's head against me. Do you think I don't notice the glances, the whispered conversations that stop when I enter the room? I don't know what you're talking about, Julia replied, maintaining her composure despite her racing heart. Yes, you do. But let me be very clear. After the wedding, many things will change in this house, and you will not be among them. The threat of dismissal hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Julia thought of her sick mother, of her younger brother who depended on her financial help. Fear tightened her chest, but instead of silencing her, it ignited a flame of indignation. If this is how you behave even before the wedding, I can only imagine what it will be like afterwards, she said, surprising herself with her boldness. I just hope Mr. Alcott realizes it in time. Felicity's face transformed with anger, and for a moment Julia thought she would be physically assaulted. But the fiancée quickly regained control, her face returning to a mask of elegant coldness. Get out of here now. Julia withdrew, trembling but determined. She knew she had crossed a line, but she also knew she could no longer pretend not to see what was happening. Mrs. Cecilia deserved protection, and if no one else would defend her, she would. The following hours passed in a whirlwind of activities. The mansion came alive with twinkling lights, the scent of fresh flowers, and the soft music of a string quartet positioned in the garden. Waiters in impeccable attire circulated with champagne glasses, while the catering team prepared gastronomic delights in the spacious, transformed kitchen. At 6 o'clock in the evening, Julia went to help Mrs. Cecilia get ready for the party. As promised, she took out the red silk dress from the wardrobe, an elegant piece that, despite the years, maintained a classic and timeless cut. Upon seeing the dress, the elderly woman's eyes shone with a joy Julia hadn't seen in weeks. Augustus always said I looked like a queen in this dress, she commented, stroking the fabric with trembling fingers. And he was right, Julia replied, helping her to dress. You look stunning in it. After helping her with the dress, Julia carefully combed the elderly woman's white hair, styling it into an elegant bun. Light makeup enhanced the serene beauty that the years had not managed to erase. As a final touch, she placed a discreet pearl necklace, not the one Felicity had set aside, but the one Mrs. Cecilia had shown weeks before, Augustus's gift when Bernard was born. Done, Julia said, leading her to the mirror. See how beautiful you are. Mrs. Cecilia observed her reflection with teary eyes. For a moment I saw the young woman I was, she murmured. Thank you, my dear. Julia felt her heart clench. There was so much affection, so much dignity in that lady, that Felicity's cruelty seemed even more monstrous. Meanwhile, downstairs, the first guests were already arriving. Bernard and Felicity greeted them at the main entrance, he elegant in his tuxedo, she stunning in a white dress with silver details that accentuated her perfect silhouette. Where is my mother? Bernard asked one of the passing servants. I'd like her to be here to welcome the guests with us. Julia is helping her get ready, sir, the employee replied. They should be down shortly. Felicity touched her fiancé's arm with delicate fingers. Darling, don't you think it would be better for your mother to wait in the winter garden? Greeting all these guests might be tiring for her. Bernard hesitated, always concerned about his mother's well-being. Perhaps you're right. I'll talk to her when she comes down. The mansion's main hall, transformed with monumental floral arrangements and soft lighting, quickly filled with London's elite. Politicians, businessmen, celebrities, all eager to attend the social event of the year, the engagement of London's most coveted bachelor. When Julia finally came down with Mrs. Cecilia, gently supporting her by the arm, the party was already in full swing. Several guests turned to observe the entrance of the Alcott family matriarch, imposing in her red dress, walking with slow but determined steps, Felicity, who was animatedly conversing with a group of socialites, visibly paled upon seeing her mother-in-law. She immediately excused herself from the guests and crossed the hall towards the two women. What is the meaning of this? She hissed at Julia, maintaining a fixed smile on her face. I gave explicit instructions. Don't speak to her like that, Mrs. Cecilia intervened, her voice surprisingly firm. Julia merely helped me put on what I chose. Felicity took a deep breath, clearly containing her anger. "Mrs. Cecilia, you look absolutely lovely," she said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "But you must be tired with all this commotion. How about spending some time in the winter garden? It's quieter there." It was a transparent attempt to remove the elderly woman from the guest's sight. Before Mrs. Cecilia could reply, Bernard approached, his eyes shining upon seeing his mother. "Mother, you look stunning," he exclaimed, kissing her cheek. "That red has always been your color." "Thank you, my son," she replied, visibly moved. "I wanted to look nice for your special day." "And you do," he affirmed, offering his arm. "Come, I want to introduce you to some very special friends." Felicity watched powerless as Bernard led his mother through the hall, proudly introducing her to the guests. When she turned to Julia, her gaze could have frozen hell. "This will not stand," she promised in a low voice, before moving away with a radiant smile to greet more guests. The night progressed in an atmosphere of apparent joy. The string quartet gave way to a small orchestra playing soft waltzes. Champagne flowed freely, conversations livened up, and the entire ambience exuded luxury and sophistication, exactly as Felicity had planned. Julia remained close to Mrs. Cecilia, attentive to any sign of fatigue or confusion. To her surprise, the elderly woman seemed more lucid than ever, conversing with impressive ease with the guests, many of whom were old family friends. "She's having a surprisingly good night," commented Dr. Montgomery, the doctor who had attended Mrs. Cecilia for years, approaching Julia. "An interesting phenomenon in Alzheimer's patients. Sometimes in situations of great emotional stimulation, they have moments of exceptional clarity." Julia nodded, observing how Mrs. Cecilia laughed at something an old friend had just told her. "She deserves nights like this, Doctor, without a doubt. And much of the credit is yours, Julia. Bernard told me how instrumental you've been in her care." The comment warmed Julia's heart. It was good to know her effort was recognized, at least by some people. Around 10 o'clock, Bernard stepped onto a small improvised stage to give a speech. The music stopped, and all the guests turned their attention to the host, who glowed with happiness with Felicity by his side. "Dear friends, family," he began, his deep voice echoing through the hall. "I thank you all for your presence on this very special night. Today we celebrate not just an engagement, but the beginning of a new phase in our lives." Polite applause rippled through the room, while Felicity smiled radiantly. "Felicity entered my life like a ray of sunshine after a long winter," Bernard continued. "Her intelligence, her determination, her affection won me over from the very first moment. But what truly convinced me she was the right woman was the way she treats my mother." Julia, who was observing the scene from close to Mrs. Cecilia, felt a chill run down her spine. Beside her, the elderly woman visibly stiffened. "In a world where respect for elders seems to diminish every day," Bernard continued, looking tenderly at his mother in the audience, "to find someone who demonstrates so much love and dedication to my mother is an invaluable gift." The words, so disconnected from the reality Julia witnessed daily, fell like stones in her stomach. Beside her, Mrs. Cecilia trembled slightly. "Therefore, before proceeding with the official engagement, I would like to ask my mother to come up here. Her place is by our side in this important moment." A murmur of approval ran through the audience as Bernard extended his hand towards his mother. Julia helped Mrs. Cecilia stand up and walk slowly to the stage. On Felicity's face, a tense smile struggled to stay in place. When Mrs. Cecilia stepped onto the stage supported by her son, the audience erupted in applause. Bernard embraced her tenderly and then took Felicity's hand, joining it with his mother's in a symbolic gesture of family. "The two most important women in my life," he declared, emotional. It was at that moment that everything changed. Mrs. Cecilia, looking directly at Felicity, spoke with a clarity that silenced the entire hall. "She hides my things and says I lost them because of my illness." Time seemed to freeze. An absolute silence fell upon the guests. Bernard looked at his mother, confused. "Mother? What are you talking about?" Mrs. Cecilia continued, her voice fragile but perfectly audible in the stunned silence of the hall. "When you're not here, she talks to me as if I were an animal. She calls me a useless old woman. She says I'm a burden she can't wait to get rid of." Felicity paled, her smile completely disappearing. "Mrs. Cecilia, you're confused again," she said quickly. "Come, you need to rest." She tried to touch the elderly woman's arm, but Mrs. Cecilia recoiled. "I'm not confused." "Not now." She turned to her son, her blue eyes shining with painful lucidity. "Ask Julia," she saw. "She knows." All eyes in the hall turned to Julia, who remained motionless near the stage, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst from her chest. The moment she both feared and at the same time secretly awaited had finally arrived. The silence that fell over the hall was dense, almost palpable. 300 pairs of eyes alternated between Mrs. Cecilia, Felicity, and Julia, as the tension grew like a wave about to break. For a moment, no one dared to breathe. Bernard, visibly stunned, looked from his mother to his fiancée, his face a mask of confusion and disbelief. The microphone in his hand trembled slightly. "Mother, what are you talking about?" he asked again, his voice low, almost pleading. Felicity quickly recovered from the initial shock. With the composure of a seasoned actress, she allowed tears to form in her perfectly made-up eyes. "Darling, your mother is confused. You know how she gets sometimes." She turned to the guests with a sad smile. "I apologize to everyone. My mother-in-law suffers from Alzheimer's and has episodes of confusion and, unfortunately, even paranoia." Murmurs of understanding and sympathy began to ripple through the audience. Some guests nodded in agreement. Others exchanged embarrassed glances. The awkward situation Felicity had so feared was happening, but she skillfully turned it into an opportunity to demonstrate her understanding of her mother-in-law's illness. "It's best to take Mrs. Cecilia to rest," she continued, casting a meaningful look at Julia. "Julia, please help Mrs. Cecilia back to her room." It was a direct order, made in public, impossible to ignore without causing even more embarrassment. Julia felt her heart clench at the skillful manipulation of the situation. She took a step towards the stage, ready to obey, when Mrs. Cecilia's voice sounded again, clear, firm, and surprisingly strong. "No, I'm not going anywhere." The elderly woman straightened up, suddenly seeming taller, more present. She turned to her son, holding his hands. "Bernard, my son, I know my mind fails. I know that sometimes I confuse the present with the past, that I forget names, faces, events." She paused, her blue eyes fixed on his. "But I would never ever confuse cruelty with kindness." Bernard looked at his mother, astonished. He had never seen her so lucid in recent months. "What exactly are you saying, Mother?" "I'm saying that when you're not around, Felicity transforms." The smile disappears, the voice changes, her eyes... She visibly shivered. Her eyes become cold, cruel. "She humiliates me, hides my belongings, says I'm a burden, that after the wedding she'll put me in a clinic far from here." Felicity let out a nervous laugh, looking at the guests as if asking for understanding. "See? That's exactly what the doctor explained. Persecutory delusions. It's a common phase of the disease." She turned to Bernard, placing a hand on his arm. "Darling, let's continue our celebration. Charles and Martha can take your mother to rest." But Bernard did not move. For the first time, he observed his fiancée's behavior carefully, noticing nuances he had never seen before. The slightly condescending tone, the way she spoke about his mother as if she weren't present. The rush to get rid of her. "Are you denying what my mother just said?" Felicity blinked, momentarily unsettled by the direct question. "Of course I'm denying it. It's absurd. I've always treated your mother with the utmost affection and respect. Everyone here is a witness to that." "When there are witnesses," Mrs. Cecilia intervened, "ask Julia. She saw how you treat me when Bernard isn't here." All eyes turned to Julia again. She remained motionless, feeling the weight of those gazes, aware that what she said in the next few moments would irrevocably change the course of several lives, including her own. "Julia," Felicity's voice was sweet, but her eyes conveyed a clear threat. "Tell everyone how loving I've always been to Mrs. Cecilia, how I've always cared about her well-being." Bernard stared at the housekeeper, his expression a mixture of confusion and plea, as if begging her to deny everything, to confirm that his mother was just confused, that his perfect world was not about to collapse. Julia took a deep breath. She thought of her sick mother, of her younger brother who depended on her help, of the job she would surely lose. But then she looked at Mrs. Cecilia, at the dignity in that wrinkled face, at the courage of that fragile woman who, even with a weakened mind, had found the strength to defend herself. Mrs. Meadows does not treat Mrs. Cecilia with respect when you are not present. Mr. Alcott, she finally said, her voice low but firm. I witnessed several situations where she was cruel, impatient, and even aggressive with your mother. A murmur of astonishment ran through the audience. Felicity paled, her face briefly contorting with anger before she regained her composure. This is absurd. A lie. This housekeeper has been jealous of me since day one. She's trying to harm me. Bernard raised his hand, asking for silence. His face had hardened, lines of tension marking his forehead and the corners of his mouth. Julia, he said, ignoring his fiancée's protests, can you give me concrete examples of what you are claiming? The housekeeper nodded, raising her chin with dignity. Last week, Mrs. Meadows hid your mother's medicine and then said she had lost them because of her illness. I found them in the bathroom bin. 2 days ago, when you were in Edinburgh, she grabbed Mrs. Cecilia's arm so hard it left marks. Just because your mother didn't want to change her clothes to receive visitors, she paused, casting an apologetic glance at the elderly woman. And last night, I heard her tell Mrs. Morrison on the phone that after the wedding, she would convince you to put your mother in a clinic, because she was an obstacle to her plans. A deathly silence followed Julia's words. Bernard stared at Felicity as if seeing her for the first time. Is this true? Felicity laughed nervously, running a hand through her perfectly styled hair. Of course not. It's the word of a housekeeper against mine. Why would you believe her? Because, Mrs. Cecilia intervened calmly, Julia has never given me reason to doubt her. And you, my dear, have never given me reason to trust you. Something in the elderly woman's tone, in the quiet certainty of her words, seemed to hit Felicity like a physical blow. Her face transformed, the mask of perfection finally falling completely. Her eyes, once affectionate, became hard as stone. You want to know? She said, her voice filled with contempt. I'm tired of this charade. Yes, your mother is a burden you carry out of guilt, not love. Everyone knows that. Do you think I wanted to waste my life taking care of an old woman who doesn't even know who I am half the time? Who confuses me with people dead for decades? She let out a bitter laugh. Why do you think I insisted so much on the prenuptial clause about medical care? To finally be able to put her in a clinic where she belongs, far from here, so we can live our lives in peace. The entire hall seemed to have stopped breathing. The guests watched the scene, mortified and fascinated at the same time. Patricia, Felicity's friend, covered her mouth with her hands, horrified by the public outburst. Bernard took a step back, as if he had been slapped. His face showed a mixture of shock, pain, and something else, a painful understanding that was beginning to form. So, it was all a farce, he said, his voice strangely calm. Your concern, your affection. Don't be ridiculous, Felicity replied, trying to regain control, belatedly realizing the mistake she had made. Of course it wasn't all a farce. I love you, Bernard. I just don't want us to waste our lives taking care of someone who doesn't even recognize us half the time. She is my mother, he replied simply. And I would be your wife, a wife who lies, who mistreats a sick old woman, who plans to separate me from my mother as soon as she has the security of marriage. Bernard shook his head, a deep sadness in his eyes. No, Felicity, that's not love. I don't even know what to call it. The audience watched in silence the implosion of the relationship they had come to celebrate. Some guests were already discreetly leaving. Others whispered among themselves, shocked by the unfolding of events. You can't be serious, Felicity said, disbelief giving way to panic. You're going to believe a confused old woman and a jealous housekeeper instead of me. After everything we've built together? What we built was based on a lie, he replied, his voice filled with disappointment. And don't call my mother a confused old woman again. Mrs. Cecilia, who had been watching the scene in silence, suddenly swayed slightly. The emotional effort had been too much for her fragile body. Bernard immediately supported her, helping her sit in a nearby chair. Are you all right, Mother? The elderly woman nodded, a tired smile on her lips. I'm fine, son. Just a little tired. Julia quickly approached, offering a glass of water that a stunned waiter handed her. Mrs. Cecilia accepted with gratitude, her eyes meeting Julia's in a look of deep appreciation. Felicity watched the scene, anger and humiliation coloring her face in red blotches. Her meticulously constructed plans crumbled before her eyes, and all because of an old woman who shouldn't even be able to form coherent sentences, and a housekeeper who should know her place. "This will not stand," she said, her voice trembling with contained fury. "You will regret this, Bernard. And you too," she added, turning to Julia with a murderous look. Without waiting for a response, she removed her engagement ring, a dazzling 5-carat diamond, and threw it at Bernard's feet. Then, with her head held high, she walked through the hall towards the exit, silence following her like a shadow. When the main door closed with a bang behind her, the hall erupted in excited murmurs. The social event of the year had turned into the scandal of the decade. Ignoring the buzz around him, Bernard knelt before his mother, holding her hands in his. "Mother, forgive me. I didn't know. I didn't realize—" Mrs. Cecilia smiled, stroking her son's face with a trembling hand. "There's nothing to forgive, my son. You only saw what she wanted you to see. And love? Well, love sometimes blinds us." Julia watched the scene, moved when she felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Charles the gardener, his eyes conveying admiration and respect. "You were very brave," he said softly. "Few would have the courage to do what you did." She shrugged, suddenly aware that she had just changed the course of her own life, for better or worse. "I couldn't keep pretending not to see." "Julia," Bernard's voice called her. He had stood up and now looked directly into her eyes. "Thank you. Thank you for taking care of my mother when I failed to notice what was happening. Thank you for having the courage I lacked." There was a raw emotion in his voice, a vulnerability she had never seen in the powerful businessman. For a moment, she saw in him the boy from the photograph Mrs. Cecilia had shown her, sensitive, true, before the world taught him to hide behind masks of perfection. "I only did what any decent person would do," she replied, embarrassed by the thanks. "No," he shook his head. "You risked your job, your stability. That requires more than decency. It requires character." Mrs. Cecilia, who was observing the exchange with attentive eyes, suddenly spoke. "Let's go home, son. This party is over." There was a profound wisdom in those simple words. The party indeed was over, not just the social event, but the entire charade carefully constructed around that relationship. Bernard nodded, turning to the few guests who still remained. "I apologize to everyone for the unexpected outcome. Please feel free to stay and enjoy the food and drink. Unfortunately, my mother needs to rest, and I will accompany her." With that, he offered his arm to the elderly woman, who rose with surprising dignity. Together, mother and son, they went up the stairs leading to the bedrooms, leaving behind the murmurs, speculations, and what should have been the celebration of a love that, in the end, revealed itself to be just a shadow. Julia remained in the hall for a few minutes, helping to organize the departure of the guests, ignoring the curious glances and unspoken questions that hung in the air. When the last guest finally left, she went upstairs towards Mrs. Cecilia's room, concerned about her well-being after so many emotions. Upon reaching the door, she heard low voices, Bernard and his mother talking. She didn't want to intrude, but something kept her there, inadvertently listening. "I always knew deep down," Bernard was saying. "There were signs, small inconsistencies that I chose to ignore because she represented everything I thought I needed." "And what do you think you need, my son?" "Perfection," he replied after a moment of silence. "Control. The illusion of a flawless life without vulnerabilities. And did that make you happy?" Another silence, longer this time. "No, it just made me lonely." Julia quietly moved away from the door, feeling that she was witnessing something deeply intimate, a revelation not meant for her. She went downstairs, heading to the kitchen to help dismantle what was left of the party. As she worked, organizing, cleaning, tidying the chaos left by the failed celebration, she couldn't help but think about what the future held. She had defended Mrs. Cecilia, she had done what she believed was right, but at what cost? Felicity didn't seem like the type of person who would accept defeat without revenge. Around 2 in the morning, when the mansion finally fell silent, Julia went to her small room at the back of the property. She was exhausted, physically and emotionally, but strangely at peace. She had made the right choice, even if she had to bear the consequences. Upon opening the bedroom door, she found an envelope on her bed. With trembling hands, she opened it, fearing a letter of dismissal. Instead, she found a check, such a large amount that her knees buckled, and a handwritten note. "Julia, No amount could compensate for what you did tonight, but please accept this as a small token of gratitude for your courage and loyalty. We will talk tomorrow. Rest well. Bernard Alcott. She sat on the edge of the bed, the check still between her trembling fingers as silent tears streamed down her face. They were not tears of relief for the financial security the check represented, but for something deeper, the recognition that, for a fleeting moment that night, appearances had fallen and the truth, simple and raw, had prevailed. Outside, the London night continued its course. In the silent mansion, 3 people slept. An elderly woman whose fragile mind had found strength to defend the truth, a man whose perfect world had crumbled so that something more authentic could emerge, and a simple woman who had risked everything to do what was right. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, no doubt, but for now truth had won. And that, Julia thought as she closed her exhausted eyes, was victory enough. The following weeks brought profound changes to the Alcott mansion. The scandal of the broken engagement became the most talked-about topic in London's high society, with distorted versions circulating in all social circles. Some defended Felicity, portraying her as a victim of a mentally debilitated elderly woman and a manipulative housekeeper. Others, who had known Mrs. Cecilia for years, intuited the truth behind the gossip. Bernard, surprising everyone, refused to fuel the rumors. When questioned by partners and friends, he merely stated that fundamental incompatibilities of values had made the marriage impossible. In private, however, he faced a painful process of self-discovery, questioning not only his choice of partner, but all the decisions that had led him to that point. One Sunday morning, 3 weeks after the incident, Julia was preparing breakfast when Bernard entered the kitchen, something he rarely did before. He wore simple clothes, jeans, a t-shirt, trainers. He looked younger, less rigid. "Good morning, Julia," he greeted, sitting casually at the kitchen table. "Can we talk for a moment?" "Of course, Mr. Alcott," she replied, surprised by the informality. "First, I'd like to know if the check I left was sufficient. For your mother, her treatment." Julia felt her face warm. She hadn't touched the money yet, uncertain about accepting it. "It was more than enough, Mr. Alcott. In fact, it's too much money. I don't feel comfortable." "Please accept it," he gently interrupted. "It's the least I can do after what you did for my mother." "For us." She nodded, not knowing how to respond. The check represented security for her family, proper treatment for her mother, college for her brother, perhaps even a modest home of their own. "Thank you," she finally said. "It means a lot to my family." Bernard smiled, a different kind of smile than usual, more relaxed, more genuine. "In fact, I came to propose something more," he continued. "After everything that happened, I realized that my mother needs more than just physical care. She needs dignity, respect, someone who truly sees her as a person." He paused, looking directly into Julia's eyes. "I would like you to officially assume the role of her primary caregiver, with a salary increase and benefits corresponding to the new position." Julia blinked, surprised. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," a voice came from the kitchen door. It was Mrs. Cecilia, leaning on her cane, smiling. "No one takes care of me like you do, dear." Julia felt tears in her eyes. In recent days, her relationship with Mrs. Cecilia had deepened. Even in moments of confusion, the elderly woman seemed to recognize her. To trust her, it would be an honor, she finally replied. That same day, during lunch in the garden, something they rarely did together before, Bernard announced another change. "I'm considering reducing my workload," he said, surprising both Julia and his mother. "Delegating more, trusting the team I've built more. I realized I spent years chasing something I never truly wanted." "And what do you want, my son?" Mrs. Cecilia asked in one of her moments of clarity that now seemed more frequent. Bernard was silent for a moment, contemplating the question. "Peace," he finally replied. "Authenticity. Relationships based on something deeper than appearances and social conveniences." He paused, looking at the garden where butterflies danced among the flowers. "I want to get to know my mother while I still can. Create memories that no disease can completely erase." In the following months, the Alcott mansion took on new life. The changes were subtle but significant. Large windows, once always closed by thick curtains that blocked the light to protect expensive furniture, now remained open, letting the sun bathe the rooms. Formal spaces rarely used transformed into living areas. The garden, once maintained with almost mathematical rigidity, gained freer flower beds, where wildflowers mixed with exotic species. Bernard began working more from home, reserving afternoons to be with his mother. Sometimes they simply sat in the garden, talking about old memories that, surprisingly, Mrs. Cecilia could access more easily than recent events. Other times they strolled through the neighborhood parks, or visited art exhibitions, activities the doctor encouraged, explaining that cognitive and social stimulation could slow the progression of the disease. Julia, in her new role, not only cared for Mrs. Cecilia, but became a kind of bridge between mother and son, translating unverbalized needs, anticipating moments of confusion, creating an environment where the disease, though present, did not define the relationship. On a particularly beautiful spring afternoon, while Mrs. Cecilia dozed in her armchair in the winter garden, Bernard approached Julia, who was organizing medications. "Do you know what impresses me most about you?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "The way you see my mother, not as a sick person, a patient, a problem to be managed, but as a complete person, with a history, with dignity." Julia smiled, feeling valued in a way she had never experienced before. "That's how we should all be seen, isn't it? Beyond labels, beyond limitations." Bernard nodded, thoughtful. "Felicity called yesterday," he commented, changing the subject. "She's engaged again. A real estate developer. So fast?" Julia was surprised. "Her plan was always the security of a good marriage," he replied without bitterness. "I hope she finds what she's looking for." The mention of Felicity reminded Julia of the threats made on the night of the party. So far nothing had happened, but the feeling that the ex-fiancé would not accept humiliation without revenge still occasionally bothered her. As if reading her thoughts, Bernard added, "Don't worry about Felicity. She's too pragmatic to risk her new position with petty revenge. Besides, I made it clear that any attempt at retaliation would result in legal consequences." Julia nodded, relieved. In recent months, she had come to know Bernard better, no longer the imposing and distant businessman, but a complex man in the process of rediscovering himself. "I received an interesting proposal yesterday," he commented, changing the subject again. "A research program on Alzheimer's, focused not only on the medical aspects, but on the quality of life of patients and their families. They are looking for funders." His eyes shone with an enthusiasm Julia had rarely seen before. "I thought about creating a foundation in my mother's name, something that could help families without resources access treatments, trained caregivers, psychological support." "That would be wonderful," Julia replied, genuinely moved by the idea. "Mrs. Cecilia would be proud. In fact," he continued, with a shy smile that made him look years younger, "I was wondering if you would like to participate in the development of the project. Your experience, your sensitivity with patients would be invaluable." The proposal took Julia completely by surprise. "Me? But I don't have the training for that." "You have something more important than diplomas," he replied. "You have genuine understanding, empathy, emotional intelligence. The rest can be learned." Before she could answer, a soft sound interrupted them. Mrs. Cecilia had woken up and was watching them with a serene smile. "You make a beautiful pair," she commented, with a lucidity that still occasionally surprised them. Bernard and Julia exchanged a quick, embarrassed glance. In recent months, an unexpected friendship had developed between them, based on mutual respect, shared concern for Mrs. Cecilia, and increasingly deep and honest conversations. But neither of them had admitted, even to themselves, that something more might be blossoming. "Mother," Bernard approached, kissing the top of the elderly woman's head. "Do you want to take a walk in the garden? The roses you planted have finally bloomed." The three went out together into the sunny garden, where butterflies danced among colorful flowers, so different from the rigid formality that once dominated the place. They walked slowly at Mrs. Cecilia's pace, stopping for her to admire every detail: the flight of a hummingbird, the scent of a newly opened flower, the pattern of the clouds in the blue London sky. "You know," the elderly woman said, stopping to rest on a wooden bench strategically placed under a jabuticaba tree. "Augustus always said that true wealth is not in the gold that glitters, but in the hands that reach out when no one is looking. Bernard and Julia exchanged an emotional glance. It was one of the late Augustus's favorite phrases, which Mrs. Cecilia hadn't mentioned in months. "Father was right," Bernard replied, holding his mother's hand in his. "It took me a while to understand that." "But you understood in time." Mrs. Cecilia smiled, her blue eyes shining with a clarity that defied the fog of the disease. "And that's what matters." Julia watched the scene with her heart overflowing with emotion. The journey that had brought them there had been marked by pain, challenges, painful revelations, but also by courage, truth, and above all, by that strange and powerful force that unites people when they allow masks to fall, when they choose authenticity over appearances. The Alcott mansion, once a symbol of ostentation and superficial perfection, was slowly transforming into a true home, a place where imperfections were accepted, where frailties did not need to be hidden, where the value of each person was not measured by their usefulness or appearance, but by their capacity to love and be loved in their entirety. The afternoon sun bathed the three in a golden light, as they talked, laughed, and simply existed together in that precious moment. A man rediscovering the meaning of family and success. A woman whose courage had transformed not only her own life, but that of everyone around her. And an elderly lady who, even with an increasingly fragile mind, still managed to teach those around her the most valuable of lessons, that in the end, the only thing that truly matters are the invisible bonds that connect us to each other. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Bernard, Mrs. Cecilia, and Julia has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we have prepared a special playlist with equally captivating narratives. Find it here by clicking on the left. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life, the power of truth, and the beauty of authentic relationships. We look forward to seeing your comments, to know what you thought of this journey through the Alcott mansion, and what you expect from our next story.